Justin Massa is an innovation consultant specialized in helping small and medium-sized businesses unlock value from generative AI. He was previously a partner at IDEO and NewLab, two of the world's leading innovation and design consultancies. And today, Justin's going to introduce us to his concept of a technique, a jig, and a tool, and how it can be used to appropriately implement opportunities you find with generative AI. Justin, thanks for coming on to Just Curious.
Thanks, Stu. Glad to be here.
Let's do it.
All right, man. So, a business is exploring opportunities that generative AI might bring to them. They find something really exciting. And now the choice is, all right, what do I do with this new opportunity to drive efficiency or create new value in my business? So when I think about kind of getting to the end of that process, my own kind of process diagram, I call it, you now need to implement appropriately. And unlike, I think, prior waves of digital technology, you actually have a bunch of choices here. I think those choices are you can implement it as a technique, as a jig, or as a tool. So what is a technique? My example here is I kind of love Panda Express. I'm a sucker for orange chicken. And, I love it when I walk in and they're flipping the woks and the vegetables fly in the air and the flame goes everywhere. I don't work at Panda Express. I couldn't do that. I bet you couldn't do that. But if we worked there for a week, I'm sure both of us would be great at making the flame go up and the customers say ooh and ah, right?
Right.
It's just a technique. They teach their employees how to do it. A lot of generative AI opportunity can be captured just by teaching your employees techniques. A prompt library is a great example of a way to teach your employees techniques. You have somebody who figures out how to do something great, and then you share it with everyone else, and they just copy paste and use one of the frontier models, and they're good to go. A second choice you have is a jig. So I was watching Ask This Old House, and they had to install door hinges on like 15 doors. And so the guy with the mustache, I can't remember his name, he pulls out a bunch of pieces of scrap wood and makes himself a little jig to perfectly hold all the doors up on their end while he puts in the new hinges. And I'm sure after he put in the 15 hinges or 30 hinges, because it's doors, he put the scrap wood back in the scrap wood pile and didn't care about it anymore, right? So a jig is a really low investment tool to help you do something repeatedly a little bit easier. I think we are in kind of a golden era of AI jigs, right?
Yeah.
There's ChatGPT projects, there's Claude projects, there's Gemini gems, there's custom GPTs, and then there's a whole slew of kind of, drag and drop kind of agentic framework companies out there like a Lindy or a Clay where you can do this stuff really, really easily. You can invest, a couple of hours or a half a day into building a tool. Now, tool probably won't last you that long, right? You get 3 to 5 months out of it. Nice work. But that's perfectly fine because you're going to capture ROI in a week off of a tool like that or off of a jig like that, right? Your third choice is like a proper tool. So, what I think about here is I've done a lot of work with Ford in my career, and Ford installs a lot of body panels on a car. And so they spend a lot of money on what's known as a self-loading rivet gun, which does only one thing on earth, which is attach a body panel on a car to another body panel. If businesses are going to be really confident that they're going to do a thing repeatedly at scale, an AI tool can make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So, that could be custom code where you're writing a custom application. That could be buying, one of these tools like a Jasper. But you need to be really confident you're going to do that thing a lot because those tools are expensive and they are long to ROI. And I think that complicates how businesses think about tools, especially given the pace of change with AI.
Yeah. And as someone begins their AI journey, and they start with a technique, do they tend to graduate into a jig and then into a tool? Is there a relationship between these, three in some sequential way? Tell us a little
Yes.
more about that.
So I would argue almost everything should start as a technique. I mean, if you have an idea, hey, I wonder if AI can fill in the blank, just
Yeah.
open up one of the frontier models in your web browser and try it. Most people are amazed at the answers they're going to get. That's just a technique, right?
Yeah.
What I find is that if a technique also requires a lot of context and a lot of nuance, so, it's not just put in a prompt, but it's also have 4 files and the prompt is going to be 5 pages long. That's when you might want to start thinking about building a jig. So I want to be clear. It's certainly not the case that every technique must evolve into a jig and then eventually a tool. But in order to capture the full ROI of some of these things, you will need to think about evolving them. right?
Yeah.
So when you get to the phase of a jig, you've now got, it's not one person doing it or maybe a small group, you've got 10, 15 people doing it. They're doing it really consistently. They're doing it over time. A jig that is creating compounding value over time is where you want to start to think about bringing in a tool. But I think you know, we're in the golden age of techniques and jigs, just given how fast the underlying technology is changing right now.
Yeah. And I could see the difference here between a tool and a jig, but when people are starting to build jigs and wonder if they need tools, what definitionally should they think about in terms of a jig? This is something they can stand up in like a day or a weekend versus, it's months. Yeah, how do
Definitely.
you think about the difference
I would
between the
say,
two?
highly unscientific here, but I would say if it is taking you more than a day to build a jig, you've invested too much time, right? Most of this
Yeah.
stuff is really simple and straightforward. It doesn't require special API access. You can use off the shelf tools, use plain language when you teach them how to do things. So I would, resist the urge to overcomplicate a jig. If people are finding pulled into making jigs that take days and days, you're probably actually combining multiple jigs into one. So, kind of taking a step back, thinking about what are kind of each of the atomic steps of the thing I'm trying to do. Let me maybe build a couple of jigs that are designed to sit alongside each other. That could start to get you confident towards maybe buying a tool in the future. But don't overcomplicate it. Kind of eat the elephant one bite at a time, as they say. Kind of break off little pieces, make them easy to replicate in the business. And then over time, the tool opportunities become really obvious to folks.
Yeah. And when it comes to that initial technique, but even the building of the jig, some people may not have experience doing either. For some people, the time to invest in a jig may not be time that they have, but they don't want anyone to spend more than a day. They just can't do it themselves. How do you think about um, being open to leveraging, partners to help do that across both techniques and jigs? And what should people look for in someone who can help them best design a technique or design a jig?
So I would say this. I am phone a friend is always a great way to overcome a barrier. So I'm a big fan of companies leveraging outside talent, very specifically because the pace of change with generative AI is extreme right now, and kind of overcoming the which tool with which feature, which model with which features enabled do I need in order to do this technique can be really frustrating for people, right? So I
Yeah.
think having kind of an external guide who is staying at the bleeding edge of things is a way to kind of overcome a lot of barriers as organizations are thinking about it. When they're looking for so I say that because like I actually think with just some outside guidance, a lot of companies should be able to build a lot more techniques and jigs than they may think they're able to at the outset, right? A
Yeah.
lot of these things you just need plain language. If you do need help, my big advice is to look for someone who is scrappy. You're not looking for these things to be heavily branded and buttoned up. I mean, I would be very cautious about deploying a technique or a jig to anyone outside of employees, right? This is not stuff you show to your customers. You're going to use this stuff internally. So let it be scrappy, let it be rough, let it have some jagged edges. So you want to work with someone who's comfortable in kind of rapid iterative prototyping approaches where they understand kind of, a prototype is a hypothesis embodied and it's a learning instrument and it's going to get us to the next step and not kind of building the tool. Like the mistake would be to kind of hire someone whose specialty is in building things at scale with robustness, aka tools, to build you a jig. You're just not going to get the right outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah. And then to get started, let's go back to the beginning. The best way to get started with a technique is to jump into a frontier model, start asking it some questions, figure out like what works and what doesn't, and then kind of iterate towards what becomes something that your teammates and partners can leverage.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I feel silly sometimes saying it, but like you just got to get started and push through kind of some of the initial frustration, some of those barriers. I really recommend people kind of find bigger chunks of time that they dedicate to working with AI, especially if they're new. It's like riding a bike. It takes some practice. And once you get the hang of it, you can do some pretty wild stuff, but you're not going to get the hang of it in 15 minutes.
Yeah, yeah, great advice. Awesome, Justin. I really appreciate you coming on to discuss this framework, and yeah, thanks again.
Thanks for having me, man.